Now, this chart is a wonderful chart, and I want to look through it. I think it summarizes so much stuff. Largely what it does, do you remember from our Old Testament class, it basically says you have a Masoretic text, the MT, the Masoretic text, and that's written in Hebrew. The LXX is the Greek New Testament that was done by the Ptolemies in the 200 kind of BC kind of era. So from the Masoretic Hebrew text and the Greek LXX text, those basically put together along with, actually I didn't put up here, but the Dead Sea Scrolls would also be part of this mixture of the Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Septuagint. You put that together and it basically becomes your Old Testament text. Then basically, in the New Testament, you put together the papyri. We said the papyri were found late, almost in the early part of the 20th century, the ending of the 19th century. The uncial manuscripts, found a lot of them in the middle of the 19th century. And the minuscules, the church has got thousands of these, and they're written late, though, and things. But we put together the papyri, the uncials, minuscules, and then from these, then, as well as the Latin Vulgate. Now, the Latin Vulgate, I haven't mentioned that, but basically the New Testament and the Old Testament were translated by this guy named Jerome. Jerome lived in Bethlehem for a while. If you go there, you can see where he did some of his translation work. But Jerome, about 400 AD. Jerome, about 400 AD. The problem was that the Roman Empire now was switching from Greek to Latin. And so Jerome wanted to learn Hebrew and things, so he went to Bethlehem. He learned Hebrew, he learned Greek, and basically he did a translation into Latin. The Latin Vulgate was so good. Jerome's Latin Vulgate was so good, it was used by the church for 1,000 years. So this Latin Vulgate was used from Jerome's time, 400 AD, down to 1400 AD, and still, if you go in certain churches today, you can still see the Latin Vulgate being used, the Latin being used. The monks will chant in Latin, and it'll come out of the Vulgate. So it's used till this day. So this Latin Vulgate was kind of incredible, used by the church for over 1,000 years. Now what happens? The problem is people in England, we don't speak Latin too well anymore. And so what happens is they say, it'd be really nice if we had the Bible in our own language. And I should say, and I probably said it before, but I'll say it again because it's really important. God always speaks the same language. What language did God speak? Every time He revealed Himself in the same language. God revealed Himself in Hebrew originally because why? Hebrew was what? Hebrew was simply a Canaanite dialect developed probably about 1800 BC. Hebrew was a Canaanite dialect. It was the land of Canaan. It was the dialect of the land of Canaan. When Abraham went to Canaan and lived at Hebron and places at Bethel and Shechem, when he went to the land of Canaan, Abraham developed that dialect, or he adopted it for himself, and that became the Hebrew language, but it was really just a Canaanite dialect. God spoke to them in Hebrew. When they went to Babylon in 586 BC, when Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel, Ezekiel, those guys carried off to Babylon, God switched to Aramaic. And so some of the Old Testament is in Aramaic, mostly in Hebrew, some in Aramaic. When Alexander in 333 BC goes and takes the whole world, God again, when He reveals the New Testament then, He doesn't stick with Hebrew and Aramaic. He speaks in Greek, and so the New Testament is written in Greek. What is the commonality with all those things? God always speaks the language of the people. God always speaks the language of the people. Today, what is the language of the people? Well, you say Mandarin, or it will be. You say English, on the internet. I want to suggest to you today, the alphabet has gone from 26 letters down to 2, and that is the 1 and the 0. And this is what's called the digital language. And this is what we're doing right now. You're watching a video. This video is all ones and zeros put together to a video, into 30 pictures a second going up on the screen. And basically you're hearing my voice. You're seeing me do these goofy hand motions. This is all the digital language. And so that's one of my big passions then, is God always speaks the language of the people. The language of the people today is digital. We listen to our MP3 music. We listen to our videos and things. And so we need to be taking the Word of God and putting it in the language of the people. And the language today is digital medium. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. But anyway, The English this is way back, they said, we like the Bible in our own language. It's interesting, the church didn't want them to have it in their own language. The church wanted it in a language like Latin where they could control the substance of it and they could control the exposition and the meaning of it for the people because they viewed the people as being stupid. And therefore they didn't want these people who could not understand to have the scriptures and then go off in some sort of weird heresy. This way they could control the message if they kept it in Latin. Well, what happened is around 1380 there was a fellow named John Wycliffe. Now, some of you may have heard of the Wycliffe Bible translators. These are some of the people, when I tell you about people that I look up to, it's the Wycliffe Bible translators, some of the best mission work done in the world. They'll go into a tribe, and I've got a friend, Joel Harlow, who went to Indonesia. You go into a tribal area. The tribal area doesn't even have a written language. It's all spoken. And so they go booga booga, and you go booga booga, and pretty soon you're boogieing back and forth, and then basically you figure out the language, and its sounds, and then connecting with its meanings, its phonemes, its morphemes, its syntax, its grammar, its discourses. You basically figure out this linguistically, and you write down then their own language, and then you have to teach them their own language so that they can read the Bible. And so these Wycliffe Bible translators are all over Africa, all over Indonesia, many of the far out places in the world, translating the Bible into languages. I've got another friend I believe is working in Brazil and some of the tribal groups up on the Amazon in Brazil. And so just doing fantastic work. Their linguistic work also, Kenneth Pike, graduate of Gordon College here. And we have the Pike Scholar Program based on Kenneth Pike. Kenneth Pike's linguistic tagmemic system was what I used for my doctoral dissertation in doing Hebrew poetry, modeling the Hebrew poetry on using Pike's linguistic methodology that basically they used as in former days for the SIL, or for the Summer Institute of Linguistics. The Summer Institute of Linguistics is run by the Wycliffe Bible translators to help their people learn how to do this linguistic work. It's just a fantastic organization. All based, John Wycliffe translates the Bible into English in 1380. Now after him, William Tyndale, about 1536. Now do you see we're into 1530s here, and now this is where we start recognizing some of the kings of England. And Tyndale basically, what happened before Tyndale, about 80 years before Tyndale, there was a thing invented that was called the printing press. In about 1450, the printing press was invented. Tyndale is about 80 years later. And so Tyndale starts making this translation. It's a wonderful translation. He's a good scholar. But basically, England is not ready for him yet, so he realizes he's going to get killed if he stays in England. And so he basically goes to Europe and has his translation. He works on his translation in Europe. He translates it, and then he prints it on the printing presses there and ships it back in boats, smuggles his translation, the Tyndale translation, back into England. Well, the people in England get this, and the people in England love his translation, but the church says, this guy is going around us and things. And so basically, the church went after him, and they captured him. They actually went to Europe, captured William Tyndale, brought him back to England, and burned him at the stake. So William Tyndale, has anybody ever heard of William Tyndale Bible College up in Detroit? And they name things after William Tyndale now. Tyndale House Publishers, the Living Bible and the New Living Translation done by the Tyndale House, named after him. There's also a Tyndale House that I did some work for over, and the Tyndale Bulletin comes out of Cambridge in England now. They've got a whole place called the Tyndale House, a phenomenal place to do scholarly research at Cambridge University in England. So William Tyndale then burned at the stake for this. Now this is in 1536. Now you say, what's going on here? It's interesting. The King James Version will be what? Less than 80 years later in 1611, King James will, and actually William Tyndale's, one of the last words out of his mouth was, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. Lord, open the King of England's eyes. And within 80 years, the King of England is funding an English translation of the Word of God called the King James Version. And he hires like 40, 50 translators or so, and basically has them work as a group. And that's better, by the way. Tyndale was a great person, but when you have one translator, it's a problem. It's better to have many translators for checks and balances and things like that. So anyways, this is how the Bible came over into English. By the way, do you know what they did with John Wycliffe? They were so angry at Wycliffe trying to make the Bible into English that they dug up his bones. They dug up the bones of Wycliffe and burned the bones. That's what the church did. So you can see the church at times does not want the people to actually have the Word of God because they want to control the message. And that's the wonderful thing about the Word of God. It kind of breaks out. And so two early guys, John Wycliffe, William Tyndale, and then, of course, coming up to the King James Version.